Unfortunately, Lyndon de Cruz, who was to talk to us about stem cells, is not able to join us this morning. But I thought I'd just give you just a couple of minutes to outline some of the work that's going on in that area. Stem cells are widely discussed, and there's a lot of excitement about their potential for helping to repair and regenerate the retina to help improve sight in those affected by AMD. I just wanted to say a couple of things about the potential and the challenges involved. Now, our bodies are made up of cells. Cells are the building blocks, if you like, of the tissues in our bodies and in our eyes. And in our eyes, there are some very highly specialized forms of cells that do specific things. They have specific functions in the eye, and we've heard a lot about that already from speakers this morning. In particular, of particular interest, because they're directly affected by AMD, are two forms of cells. One is the light-sensitive cell, that is the photoreceptor cell itself, and the other is the supporting underlying pigment cell. These are affected by AMD and its dysfunction, that is when these cells don't work or when they die, that we lose central sight. And so there's a lot of excitement about potential advances in research that might be able to give us the means to repair and regenerate these cells by transplanting them from various sources into the eye in order to provide a fresh supply, if you like, of these cells. Now, there are a number of different sources of cells, as Dave outlined earlier. Stem cells are cells which are not specialized. They are cells which are essentially relatively young, if you like, and they have yet to develop a specialized form and function. And the potential excitement is that these cells can be potentially persuaded to develop, using various means, into specialized cells, including photoreceptor cells, that's the light center cells, and pigment cells. And there's a lot of work underway to find ways of persuading these cells to develop appropriately into these specialized cells that can be transplanted into the eye, where it's hoped they can actually communicate with each other, they can integrate into the existing retinal cells and communicate using nerve impulses in a way that is meaningful and can actually allow cells to survive and to function in a valuable, meaningful way. Now, there's a lot of exciting progress in this field. A lot of work in the laboratory has shown that it is possible indeed to derive cells, to persuade stem cells to become eye cells, and that when injected into the eye in a very specifically controlled laboratory setting, these cells do appear to be able to survive. They can integrate in an appropriate, meaningful way, and they can actually form functional connections with existing cells in the eye that enable the restoration of sight. Now, the challenge now is to translate these very exciting developments in the laboratory into something which could be of value, of benefit to people with AMD and other sight disorders. And I cannot underestimate the challenge, the amount of challenge that this represents. There are a huge number of issues that need to be addressed in order to make this work. Of course, there's the possibility of rejection after transplantation, but above all, the challenge is to persuade the cells to develop appropriately in the laboratory and to get them to integrate functionally in the eye. Now, we have reached a stage now where we're beginning to introduce these cells in clinical trials to people with macular disease. So there is a trial ongoing to introduce stem cell-derived pigment cells in people with an early, this inherited form of macular degeneration. And the aim of this trial is to ultimately look at the safety of the cells, of the technique in the eye, and the potential for the cells to survive. In addition to that, there's a similar trial going on which is called the London Project, in which Lyndon de Cruz would have spoken had he been here this morning, in which pigment cells will be introduced into people with age-related macular degeneration. This work has been in development for a number of years, and it's hoped that actually it will reach clinical application in a trial imminently. We're also looking at the possibility of replacing the photoreceptor cells, that's the light-sensitive receptor cells, and that's work that Robin Alley, who we heard speaking earlier, is leading. This is at a much earlier stage of development, but the results in the laboratory suggest that this is feasible, and that we are hoping that further work over the next few years will ultimately lead to a clinical trial within the next 5 to 10 years for this particular application. Now, there are certain situations where transplantation of either pigment cells or photoreceptor cells in isolation may be of benefit, but because their mutual survival their survival is mutually dependent, so it depends on each other, then for many applications, for many forms of retinal disease, it may be even better to introduce both pigment cells and photoreceptor cells together. And that brings its own challenges, but that's something that we hope to work towards in the more distant future. Does anybody have any specific questions about stem cells before I move on?
Yes, could you just clarify, are the stem cells, is the macula made in the laboratory and then inserted into the eye, or is it the stem cell put into the eye in the hope that it will develop into a macula?
Thank you. So I'll just explain the question. The question is whether the no, that's right. I'll just because you're mic'd up. In case anybody hasn't heard, the question relates to whether the cells are generated in the laboratory or whether the stem cells are injected directly into the eye in the hope that they'll develop into the appropriate cells. Well, there are a number of trials ongoing in which relatively immature stem cells are indeed injected into the eye in the hope that they will develop appropriately and into the cells that are required, and that these will integrate successfully without harm. Now, there is a concern that by injecting stem cells which are very powerful into the eye at a very immature stage, that there's a risk of uncontrolled proliferation, uncontrolled development and proliferation in the eye, which may be inappropriate and unhelpful and possibly even harmful. So we are more keen to identify exactly what, essentially we're keen to develop cells in the laboratory that are already mature specialized cells and to inject those into the eye so that we can be confident that they're going to perform the right function and that they're going to do so safely.
Thank you. You talked about the cells being generated in the laboratory and then being put into the eye and they get taken up by the eye. But I'm a bit confused because you also said that there's this, there's a chance that, or rather you said that they get rejected as well. They get taken up by the eye, or do they get rejected after a period of time? I'm just confused about that.
So with any transplantation procedure, there is a concern that because they are from a different individual, they might be recognized by the immune system as foreign and rejected. Now, there are a number of ways of potentially addressing that by choosing the sources of the cells, or potentially by managing the rejection, managing their vulnerability to rejection. More recently, there's the potential that actually cells can be harvested from an individual, that they can be manipulated in the laboratory and persuaded to become specialized eye cells. And so that's one way that it may be possible to reintroduce a fresh supply of cells appropriately into the eye that are actually derived from the same person and hence at less risk of immune rejection.
Right, but so far you're saying it's quite successful. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that there is some exciting progress in the laboratory that helps support our efforts toward developing a treatment that might be helpful for the future. At the moment, It's at a very early stage. We're beginning to test the safety in people, but we cannot at the moment predict when we might be able to see benefit.
I got you. Thank you.
I'm afraid I'm more confused now than I was at the start. You seem to be saying now that there's two completely separate types of AMD, one which affects the photoreceptor cells and the other that affects the pigment cells. How do I know which I've got?
It's a very good question, and actually the question about whether the disease primarily affects the pigment cells or the photoreceptor cells is one which we could debate over a period of weeks, or if we had some really clever scientists, we could do so over years and never come to a conclusion. Both cells are involved in the condition, and we know that both cells can die as a result of the condition. We do not know at the present time the extent to which the light center cells or the pigment cells are responsible primarily for the condition, but I think it's important to consider that both are typically affected, whether that's wet or dry AMD.